race for South Carolina State Senate District 41 is heating up between current State Senator Sandy Senn and small business lender Sam Skardon. Today, I talk one-on-one with Sam for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Sam Skardon, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks for having me, Quintin. Sorry, you might have heard my dog in the background.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He's saying hello, too.
Yeah.
Oh, no worries. No worries
He wants to be in the interview, too.
I see.
He's cuter than I am, too.
Well, he'll make his debut soon, I'm sure.
Exactly.
But obviously, you are a Democratic candidate for South Carolina State Senate District 41, which covers mostly West Ashley and other parts of Charleston. Obviously, we're 22 days out before the actual campaign of the election. Who is Sam Skardon right now as a candidate?
Thanks for asking, Quintin. So thank you for having me back. Third time I've been on here, and I love it every time. You do such a great service for our community. And I said before we started recording, I'll say it again. I'm so terribly sorry for the tragedy and the crime that happened against you. You are a staple of our community, and it was an attack on all of us. I'm glad to see you doing better, and glad to get to talk to you again afterwards and show my unwavering support for you. I couldn't encourage you enough to keep doing what you're doing, and I hope this only encourages you to do it more.
Oh, absolutely. And besides those social media comments about people who don't even know me, I'm doing just fine, and who weren't even there. But everything's been taken care of, and we're moving forward. But let me talk to you about, obviously.
Let me.
Sure.
I do want to just answer your question before, because I don't want to dodge the question about how we're doing. Get a lot of momentum out there, and you mentioned Election Day is 22 days away, but it's actually right now. It is an election month. Right now, anyone in Charleston County can go vote at the North Charleston Coliseum. You can submit your absentee ballot request by mail. You can return it right now. And also for our constituents up in Dorchester County, our district does go up into North Charleston and Somerville, up Dorchester Road into Dorchester County. There's going to be an early voting remote site at Westcott Park that opens next week, too, that's right across the street from our district. So, yes, Election Day is 22 days away, but it doesn't have to be. You can get out there and vote right now. I think that's really important to know.
What has it been like for you as a candidate? You know, what is it like knocking on the doors, and obviously in the midst of COVID, that is? Yeah,
so it's very hard. We've been a lot remotely, and obviously we're doing this via Zoom. Appreciate you accommodating us that way. We've done a lot of Zoom house parties, a lot of Zoom events, a lot of phone calls to voters. We're dropping lid on people's doors. I'm still hesitant to. I don't want to spread the virus. I don't want to get someone sick. I want to be safe and responsible. So we're walking the streets in neighborhoods, meeting people on the streets who have chosen to be outside. We're wearing a mask, but we're still being as careful as we can, because I just do think it's very important as a resident of the Low Country and as someone who's aspiring to be an elected official and a leader in our community, that we show responsibility and concern for this virus. So managing a campaign, running a campaign in the final stretch, and handling the responsibilities and the realities of COVID are a difficult line to walk, and we're trying to do the best we can with it.
How do you lead in District 41?
It's a great question. Well, I think District 41 needs a strong voice for progress in our state. You know, we have a lot of young families over here who send their kids to public schools, who struggle with housing prices, student debt, healthcare costs. And there are not many people in the legislature right now who share that experience and who can advocate for them because they understand those issues and they deal with them in their own families every day. Not only do I see a need for our state to make progress on each of those issues, I need our state to make progress on it for the sake of my own family, for the families of my friends and neighbors right here in our district. So I think part of leadership is fighting for the people that that need a voice in this district, and that's who we're running to represent. This is a district that has changed a lot in the last couple of years. It's becoming much younger, much more diverse. And I think with that comes a shift in values. And, you know, I was raised here in the Low Country and value my public education that I got here. And I think we have a duty and an obligation to dramatically improve it for generations moving forward. We have a duty to build an economy that works for everybody. That's what I do every day as a small business lender. So your question about how do you lead, I think you have to remember who you're fighting for and who this district is made up of, and do your best to be their voice and their advocate on the biggest issues in our state.
How do you improve on those values 4 years from now?
Quintin, I'm just worrying to get to 4 weeks from now, right now. I will tell you, if we're lucky enough to win this election, if we're blessed with being able to serve this district, I think you have to deliver results. And so whether that's the transportation funding our district needs, whether that's the improvements in public schools, the improvements in teacher pay, protecting our environment and getting tougher on polluters that are constantly threatening our harbor and our waterways, you have to show people results. And so, there's some big projects in our district that need completing, like I-526. We have major flooding issues every single day. People's homes and businesses are threatened in our district. We have to show them that the state government is going to take a leading role on each of those issues, and we're going to actually address them and get results for people. So if I'm lucky enough to serve, hopefully next year and 2 years and 3 years or 4 years down the line, we'll be able to talk about some of those results that we're delivering for our district.
You talk about 526. When you obviously walking around the neighborhoods and talking to people, whether it be face-to-face or virtually, have you been able to take a survey to see who's still in favor of 526 and who's actually against it?
We haven't done a formal survey of it by any means, but anecdotally, just talking to people, it's very important. And traffic as a whole in our district is an extremely important issue. And we are a very suburban district. You mentioned West Ashley. We also have James and Johns Island. We have parts of North Charleston and Somerville along Dorchester Road. Right. We literally have some of the worst traffic hotspots in all of South Carolina, whether it's Savannah Highway, Maybank Highway, 61, Dorchester Road, 526. That's all our district. So, the first thing you hear when you talk to a lot of folks out there on the streets or on the phones, what are you going to do about traffic? And 526 is part of that solution. It's not the only part of the solution. We need mobility options. We're quickly becoming one of the biggest areas in the country without a really viable mass transit system, without bike and pedestrian connectivity. Right now, there's no way to safely bike on or off James Island, where I live. So there's a lot we can do in terms of mobility and traffic. And to answer your question, 526 is a big part of that, but it doesn't end there.
What mobility options are viable right now?
Well, that's a good question, Quintin. I'd say most of our district gets in their car and drives alone places. I saw a survey that said 81% of Charleston area commuters drive alone in their cars to work. And frankly, that's one of the reasons our traffic is so difficult. And I don't fault commuters for that. I'm one of them. There just aren't other options right now. There's no realistic option to take public transportation. There's no bike and pedestrian connectivity. We haven't developed in a way that puts work and live-workplace spaces together so people could realistically walk to work if they live in our district. We got to be smart about how we develop so people don't need to travel as far. And we got to provide options for those people who do need to travel farther. Because, to answer your question about what's viable right now, there ain't much other than getting in your car and driving and sitting in a lot of traffic. And I think our state should play a much more leading role in changing that. So the innovative transportation projects that are happening in our district, things like the pedestrian bridge over the Ashley River, the proposed bus rapid transit out Savannah Highway, up Dorchester Road, down Folly Road, those are all things that are being funded locally and federally right now. But our state isn't really actively involved, and it's not leading on them. And I think that state level of government is a very important role to play, and it says something about our state if we're not willing to do that right now, and I want to change that.
Now, after you talked to all of these people about 526, do you support it or are you against it?
I'm for it. I do think it's a vital piece of infrastructure for our district. Frankly, the development that people were worried it would create has already happened, but it's just happening without the infrastructure to make it livable and practical. So I do think it's a vitally necessary road for people who are commuting in all directions on our district. But I'd also point out that we have to do it right. One of the things that drives me crazy in the low country, having grown up here and now living here, is we have so many bridges that are just roads. They don't have a bike lane, no pedestrian lane, no space for mass transit. The Ravenel Bridge is one of the only things that does, but we should never build a bridge in the low country again that doesn't have a bike and pedestrian and mass transit capability. So when we do complete 526, which I fully intend to do as a state senator representing this district, I take personal responsibility for that. It's got to be a complete street, and it's got to not just be for cars. It's got to be for every form of transportation, for people to have that connectivity that just doesn't exist right now between James Island, Johns Island, West Ashley.
And what's your complete streets plan?
Yeah. Well, like I said, our state has to be a leader on it and invest in it. Right now, like I said, when a local municipality wants to get involved in an innovative transportation project, they have to raise the funds locally or they have to go to the federal government. And it's time that our state Department of Transportation start getting involved in promoting more than just roads as mobility answers in the Low Country.
What is your confidence in the Department of Transportation right now?
I'd like to see them be more innovative, frankly. I mean, that's they have a decent amount of money because the gas tax was raised a couple of years ago. They're putting a lot of it into roads. I'd like to see more of that funding come to our district. But most importantly, I'd like it to come in the form of the roads we need, but also the complete streets that go along with those roads. So my confidence in the department will go up if I see a little more commitment to that.
Now, obviously, you talk about obviously a couple of things in that particular instance right there, and I just lost my train of thought.
That's all right. That's all right.
Much stuff going on right here.
Yeah, we're talking about a lot of big things, man.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Now, if you were in the State House today, how would you have voted for the gas tax?
I would have actually joined our opponent in supporting it. I do think there are times, look, I don't like paying taxes as much as the next person, and we want to keep taxes as low as possible. But there are instances when it is important that we have such a pressing need that sometimes we have to just find a new revenue source for them. And at the time when it was passed, I believe 3 or 4 years ago, we had one of the lowest gas taxes in the country. It might have been the lowest, and our roads were crumbling as a result. So I do think it was a necessary thing to do. I will say, though, I think it's important to acknowledge that people on both sides of the aisle supported it, including our opponent, because a lot of times in these races, you'll hear one side or the other, one party or the other is for a tax increase and the other's not. In South Carolina, actually, when we have needed to do those things, it's been bipartisan, and there is not a big partisan difference on those things in South Carolina.
Are you in favor of a tax increase?
Well, like I said, only when it's absolutely necessary, and like that instance, the gas tax. The one other area I think that it is important that we talk about better and different funding for is our public schools. Okay. Right now, just schools in South Carolina have been chronically underfunded. They're not getting the results we need to get out of them. And it's such a priority for our state. It's the future of our children. It's the future of our workforce, the future of our economy. It's worth investing in. And if we do, it'll pay dividends in the long run. So that's another area where I think we have to find more and different funding for. But the only types of taxes I would ever before is any kind of immediate, urgent, pressing need on the scale of our crumbling roads or our failing schools. It's got to be highly justifiable, and in my mind, those two things are.
What is the pressing need right now for your district?
Well, we talked about infrastructure. I'd say education. I mean, Quintin, let's talk about the fact that our district has 33 public schools, and half of them are rated good or excellent, and the other half are rated poor or failing. We have the disparities that are across South Carolina right here in our district. And, when kids don't show up ready to learn, and they don't go through any kind of pre-K program, and there are 88,000 kids in South Carolina who aren't in a pre-K program right now, 3 and 4-year-old kids who aren't in pre-K. When they don't show up ready to learn, they don't show up on reading level, they fall behind and they never catch up. And the data says, starting in 3rd grade, you can predict whether a child's going to go to college or go to prison based on their test scores. We need to start intervening early. We need to start addressing the disparities in our system. And then we need to recruit, retain, and reward great teachers. South Carolina's 47th in teacher pay right now. And it's just so important to the quality of our kids' education. I believe teachers deserve our thanks. They deserve to be treated well and paid well. But at the end of the day, I think that's an important thing to do because it educates our kids better. And we get better outcomes when we have better teachers, and we have teachers who we can recruit, retain, and build experience for and reward them for the quality of their work. So education, to answer your question, the biggest priority for our district, for our state, is getting our public schools off the bottom of every list and to the top of them.
And I'm going to expand on that in just a few minutes later on in the interview. But let me ask you this. What obviously inequities and disparities are needed to be addressed right now in your district?
Well, we talked about the disparity in education right now. I mean, if you look at outcomes in our district across Charleston County, across Dorchester County, and South Carolina, they're easily broken down along lines of race, along lines of income. So we need to break down our educational disparities, number one. And we have economic disparities too. And you could argue there's a kind of chicken and egg cycle there going on where educational disparities breed economic disparities. But my background is small business lending, so and economic planning. I have a business degree and worked in our private sector and helped build our economy here for years. The disparities we see in our economy in Charleston are actually dramatically worse than you see in other southern cities our size. You know, right up the road in Greenville or Nashville, up in Durham and Raleigh, North Carolina.
Right.
Those are all southern cities too. They have equally difficult histories with race and social justice. But if you look at income disparities and earnings disparities, their gap isn't nearly as large as Charleston's is. So we don't just have an American problem here in our disparities or a Southern problem. We have a uniquely Charleston problem. And I think it's incumbent on all of our leaders to acknowledge that and work to address it.
I know this might be a redundant question, Sam, but how do you close that gap in District 41?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think let's go back to schools. That's where education and that's where economic opportunity is born, is in a good education. We're right now in the best jobs in the Charleston area. We're making wide body airplanes. We're making electric cars. We're sending ships all over the world with cargo from those factories. But to get those jobs, you know, those aren't the kind of jobs you can get if you fail out of middle school or high school. We need to keep kids in school. We need to get them great education so they can come out and take the jobs of the 21st century and live up to their God-given potential. Also, they can be fully successful in the economy of the 21st century.
Now, how many jobs are needed in District 41 right now?
Well, that's a good question. I think a little while ago we touched on the development patterns here. What I would like to see, and I would work for as our state senator, is bringing more jobs to the district so people don't have to commute so far out of them. MUSC is opening has opened a large facility over at Citadel Mall.
Right.
That's shortening commutes for a lot of people who live West Ashley. It's making it a lot more accessible for people. They're doing commutes out of town at rush hour in the mornings and back into town at night. That helps our traffic issues. It makes it better to live, work, and play here in West Ashley. As we talk about that Citadel Mall redevelopment project, I think we need to land some major anchor job creators there. So West Ashley can be a place, and our district can be a place, not just where people live and play, but also work. And they have those short commutes. They have those options to bike and walk to work. That's really important to bring in our district. And as we move forward, and hopefully have the opportunity to serve the district, it'll be a top priority for me to create those true live, work, play communities by attracting jobs to the places where people are already living and playing.
And, you know, obviously when people get mad, sometimes they'll tell somebody go play in traffic. But let me ask you a serious question. Have you been able to stand in traffic and see all the congestion and the times that are affecting people's commute?
I commute every day. Yeah, I'm the same way. For a while, I was working up in North Charleston, so I would commute through our district from James Island up Highway 17 to 526 up into North Charleston. And now my day job is downtown, so I commute downtown. I feel your pain to everybody out there who sits in that traffic. I'm with you, and I couldn't agree more that among the priorities for our district, it's the one people feel every single day that we have to make progress on. And it's tightly related to flooding too, because one of the biggest drivers of all this traffic is the fact that, you know, so many of our roads can just get flooded out and closed at any given time. So in addition to all the mobility options we talked about, we also need to talk about flooding solutions, because that is a huge driver of our traffic as well. And it's a threat to our personal and commercial property out here.
What solution is ideal right now?
Yeah, so our state has to get serious about addressing climate change. You know, for as long as I've lived here, Quintin, since I was growing up, I was a kid, I've seen the flooding get worse and worse. I've seen the hurricanes come year after year more frequently. And our state government is in total denial about why that's happening and the fact that we could be playing a role in fighting back against it. So, we have coal-fired power plants here in South Carolina that I think we should phase out and replace with renewable energy, so we're not contributing to all this carbon in the air. We make electric vehicles here, but we have very little infrastructure to drive them here. In fact, you'd have a hard time driving some of the cars off the lot that we produce up in Berkeley County. Right. We have to change our development patterns so we're not sprawling out into wetlands and marshes that play such a vital role in absorbing some of that water. Because now when you look at what's flooded, you can tell exactly where it was. It's places that were wetlands and marshes and swamps. So it's really important that we acknowledge and address the big picture issues here and see that we have a role in fixing them. there are also things we can do at a state level. There are federal buyback programs for properties that are repeatedly flooded through FEMA. One of the issues is there's buybacks can take a really long time. So people end up not doing them, or they end up, kind of in limbo for potentially years dealing with the federal government on a buyout of their property.
Right.
There's some interesting cases where states and counties around the country are kind of providing bridge loans so that the delay it takes in working with the federal government, all the red tape you got to go through, there's at least some kind of gap program that is provided by a local municipality or state government to ease that process and to make it more realistic for families. I think we should expand those in South Carolina and invest in those because, at the end of the day, we have to get serious about our flooding issues and understand it's not going to get better if we just hope it does. We need to actively change the way we develop our community, the way we treat our environment, and the way we mitigate each of these flooding solutions.
And what is the development pattern right now in District 41?
Yeah, I think unfortunately we've sprawled a lot. I think it's really important that we not cut off economic growth in Charleston. Like I said, I have a business background. I worked on an economic development strategy for the region, and now I lend to small businesses every day who, every single place I just mentioned knows that you can't just turn an economy on and off. You can't stop people from coming. You don't want to, because when you do flip that off switch, when you make it impossible for an economy to grow, it ends up shrinking. And that's certainly not what we would ever want for our economy in the Charleston area. We have to be smarter, though. I mean, we have to do infill. We have to, rather than clear cutting new pieces of land, we have to have a bias for redeveloping places that are currently underdeveloped or underutilized within the area. So I think it's really important that our state government has policies that encourage that smart development, smart growth. So we're not just sprawling all the way down to Savannah or up to Columbia.
Yes, indeed. Are you in support of fill and build?
No is the short answer. What I think we need to do is make sure that the development practices we use is not harmful to communities that are already there. And unfortunately, fill and build often creates lots of runoff. And so the communities around it suffer when you fill in a piece of land and all of a sudden places that didn't used to flood now do. My wife and I actually live right next door to a development where that happened, and we've seen the increase in flooding since it was created. I think we have to have policies that hold developers accountable, that don't allow for plans that will create more flooding in existing communities. I think there is a way we can grow and manage the water we have, but it has to be baked into every plan we approve and every development we approve. Because if we don't pay attention to it, if we let people get away with anything, then it's going to end up hurting our neighbors, just like we talked about. Unfortunately, it's happening too much with those fill and build projects.
And let me ask you an interesting question, because obviously you talk about policies for developers. Would you have any incentives for developers who want to, have any business in District 41? Yeah,
so that's a great question, Quintin. Absolutely. I think you want to use them situationally. You want to attract the right jobs, the right time. Unfortunately, we're in a district and a part of the state that has a lot of economic growth. We're operating from a position of strength in that we can be very targeted about the jobs we attract to make sure they're fit well with our existing economy, with our existing workforce, and our existing environment. And I think as long as it meets those criteria, those are absolutely the kind of jobs we want to attract to the district, and we should be aggressive in pursuing them.
Now, obviously, we talked about all of these issues right now in your district. What exactly is the quality of life?
Well, I don't want to be too pessimistic here. The quality of life in Charleston, it's a great place to live. We have some of the best people, some of the best environment there is in America here. It's why I grew up here. I went to college out of town. I lived out of town for 10 years and moved back. It's just there's no better place in the world to live, and there's no better people to live with. That doesn't mean we don't have challenges we need to address. That doesn't make our schools any higher on those lists of literacy rates and SAT scores, things that we need to move up in order to have great public schools in South Carolina. It doesn't mean we can ever let our guard down on fighting to protect that environment, which is so important, and becoming leaders in the fight against climate change. So I think we have a long way to go. I think we have a lot of progress we can make, but I don't think that diminishes the fact that a lot of people want to live here for very good reason.
Now, what is the literacy rate in District 41?
I don't know specifically for our district. I know the kindergarten stats because we talk about universal pre-K a lot. And I would say, only about half of students in South Carolina show up on grade reading level in kindergarten. So, you have half of students in South Carolina are showing up for their first day of school in kindergarten behind. And again, you break those disparities out. It's only about a third of Black students and only about, somewhere around 2/3 of white students that are showing up ready to learn, able to read at the appropriate level for a 5-year-old starting kindergarten. So to answer your question about literacy rates for the district, I don't know specifically. I'm happy to get back to you on it. But for kids who are at that critical stage of their early childhood development and their learning careers, they're not where they need to be on literacy. And that affects their educational careers and our entire educational system.
And I wanted to go back to what you said about the buyback programs. My mind's all over the place. So I'm not
sure. Yeah.
My questions are here, but I'm not even thinking the top of my head. But let me ask you this about those buyback programs. How many homes in District 41 have been repeatedly flooded out over the years, say for 2 years?
We have a lot. So we have some of the worst flooding hotspots in South Carolina right here. I mentioned some of the traffic hotspots we have, but the Dutch Dialogues identified the Church Creek Basin, which is in our district, has repeatedly flooded notoriously for years. Over here where I live on James Island, there are several neighborhoods that there have been lawsuits with the developers about whether they should have ever been built or not, or whether they were legally built. So we have extremely difficult flooding hotspots. I was talking with some people on Johns Island this morning about just the increasing flooding over there and how it takes days for water to drain after a rainstorm. Every single part of our district, up in Asheboro in Dorchester County, where we were walking the streets yesterday, like I said, meeting some people.
Sure.
The only thing a lot of people can talk about up there is the fact that the Ashley River has basically come into their neighborhood multiple times in the last 5 years. And, when you have a river coming into your neighborhood, there is no small fix to that. You have to think big picture. You have to think about how are we going to continue to serve the residents that are there because we allowed the homes to be built. And we make sure that doesn't happen again. But then, address some of the reasons that river is rising in the first place.
And let me get back to obviously what you talked about early in the interview. You talk about economic growth in District 41, but how much tax revenue has District 41 lost over the past 2 years?
Well, let's talk about the pandemic because over the last 6 months, our economy has totally changed. So I do small business lending. We try to support some of the smallest businesses, local businesses in Charleston, restaurants, food trucks, daycare centers, nail salons, HVAC companies.
Right.
And what we've discovered talking to them at the height of this pandemic and when everything shut down, you're looking at about a 50 to 60% potential failure rate for some of those businesses. And, laying off 9 out of their 10 employees. And our state's unemployment rate is still twice what it was at the beginning of 2020. So we're not out of the woods on this yet. And of course, we actually have more cases of COVID-19 than we did when we shut everything down. So I don't think we can at all think we're out of the woods on this. The economic recovery is going to be very long and hard because as much stimulus as there's been, from the federal government trying to pour some money into our economy, at the end of the day, the just underlying demand, the thing that drives an economy, to get people spending money, isn't there right now. And so we need to be creative in how we address this as a state. We need to target our most vulnerable local businesses. For us, the people we work with are a lot of women, minority, veteran entrepreneurs who couldn't get the traditional access to capital, a traditional bank loan. They're who are most vulnerable because they have the lowest cash reserves. They're the most dependent on those customers coming in day to day. And, it's make or break for them if they have a good weekend or a bad weekend. Our state needs to start small, grassroots in our economy and grow it up from there. Because, the number of jobs lost both in our district and in our state is still staggering. And unfortunately, until we take this virus seriously, until we have a real comprehensive plan for it and beat it, I think we're going to continue to see a very difficult economic time for so many people.
And let me ask you a couple of 3 questions. The first, should the governor, that is, enact a statewide mask mandate?
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't but, I couldn't more strongly agree with the need to wear masks. I'm glad our mayors did them locally here. The science just says it works. And I know it's a minor inconvenience. I get bothered wearing them sometimes when I'm out in public, but you know what? It is the safe, respectful, responsible thing to do for all of your neighbors, all of your friends, all your family you're coming in contact with. And it is proven to reduce the transmission rate of this virus. Even in some people say, even though whenever we do have a vaccine, it probably won't even be as effective as just wearing a mask, at least not in the first couple waves or trials of it. And I think our state just has a responsibility to do everything possible to beat this virus. And we haven't done that yet. And there are still plenty of options on the table to help us do that, including wearing masks.
And what options are ideal for you in your district?
Yeah, so we talked about mask mandate. I'd say the way we run our schools too. So right now, another issue that we're hearing just so much from people we're talking to on the phones is how difficult it is to manage this remote learning that so many students are enrolled in right now in our district. And, parents are trying to work their day jobs remotely on a computer while their child learns on another computer.
Right.
It's just not sustainable. So I think I'm frustrated that we never had a real state master plan on what to do with going back to school. It seemed like we waited till the very end of the summer to come up with any kind of plan. And when we did, it was not what a lot of teachers thought was important. A lot of stakeholders weren't involved in the process. I still think we need to find a way to get kids back in school in a safe way. And I don't see the statewide leadership on that right now. I think every district's trying to figure it out for themselves, but the result of it is every family's trying to figure it out for themselves and is being incredibly strained in that process.
And let me ask you a basic question, Sam. How many students in District 41 still don't have broadband access?
That's a good question. I know statewide numbers are, in the 30% range not having access. And I know in the Charleston area, it's a little better. I think it's about 18 to 20% don't have access. So again, our district is so gerrymandered. We have parts of all over the low country, and we have parts of North Charleston, parts of Somerville, parts of West Ashley and James Island, parts of Dorchester County and Charleston County. It's hard to break out those kinds of stats just per district, but as a low country as a whole, there's still about 1 out of every 5 students, 1 out of every 6 students doesn't go home to broadband access, which makes it nearly impossible to learn in a remote setting that we're talking about.
Well, let me ask you this. Should the state make internet a utility?
I think it's an interesting question, and I think it's a concept that we need to seriously study and look at, because I agree that it is just, you can't be successful without it, almost on the lines that you can't be successful without power running to your house, water, gas, however you power your home, your appliances. It is just that important to succeeding in our economy that you have access to the internet and access to all the tools that go with it. So I want to see more on specifically studying proposals, how we would do that and what it would look like, and how the private sector can play a role in being partners in that process. Because I'm, like I said, business training, private sector background here. I don't think we should just have a government take over a lot of industries. In fact, I don't think we should have government take over any industries. But I do think, if we talk about making the broadband universally accessible and available, that's a good goal for our state. And I think we should engage the service providers right now on how we can accomplish that. And once we get to a specific proposal, I'll give you a firm yes or no. But I think we should work together, build a coalition, study it, and make it a very real reality that has a tangible proposal in the near future.
And you bring me to my next question about the private sectors. Should fiber lines ever be placed in rural places of South Carolina?
Fiber lines, is that what you said?
Sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know the technology as well as I should. That's not my expertise, but I do think that we need to do everything we can to expand access. And if that'll help do it, then let's talk about how we do it, how much it's going to cost, and who's going to do it. But expanding access is the goal, and if it takes more lines, then we can have that conversation.
And lastly, I know you talked about obviously jobs lost during COVID. How many jobs have been lost in your district, District 41?
That's a good question. I know Charleston as a whole has lost around 56,000 hospitality jobs, and that was the peak of the pandemic. We're still dealing with it with the restaurants we talk to. I mean, a lot of them have been incentivized to keep people on, and then also people are getting unemployment at home. which has been a very difficult process to manage through a lot of state unemployment offices. But we have a lot of service workers in our district. A lot of people who, work restaurants downtown, work at hotels downtown. Their income depends on those tourism hospitality jobs, and those are on the front lines of the job losses right now. So yeah, I have multiple friends I see every day. I live right next door to me. We see them walking our dog all the time. They've been out of work for months. I was talking to a family yesterday, someone who works 2 different part-time jobs. Apparently, and she lost both of them, but that has made getting state unemployment assistance extremely difficult. So the pain is real. It is being felt every day out there by people in our district, by hardworking people who want to be working right now. And I think we have a responsibility to them as a state to bring back our economy as strongly and as quickly as possible in a responsible way, and make sure our safety net systems work for them. One thing I point out to folks is that we've been trying to make it so difficult to get on unemployment for so long. We've been punishing people for being poor in South Carolina for so long that what people are discovering when a huge number of people all of a sudden need that safety net, it's extremely difficult to navigate, extremely hard to use. And it's because we've been underfunding it for years. We've been trying to discourage people from using it for years, even when they really do need it. And, I think we need to understand that the difficulties people are having aren't an accident. They're a result of a state government that's been neglecting them.
And I want to ask you one last question about education. Sorry about the delay here, but
sure.
What would you obviously replace specialized testing with, or standardized testing, I should say?
Yeah, that's a great question, Quintin. So I actually used to work at a career center. One of my jobs a long time ago when I was in business school was I worked with students in career centers. And I'll tell you, for colleges and graduate schools, it's all outcomes based. It's, what percentage of your students got a job within 6 months of graduation? How much did they make? What industries did they go into? How far did they have to move to get a job? If they weren't seeking a job, maybe they were seeking the next level of education or taking care of a sick parent or something. Were they able to achieve what they wanted to? Were they satisfied with the education they got, and that it gave them the tools for success that they wanted and needed? I believe in outcomes-based measurements is the short answer to your question. So how many of our students are going on to be successful in our economy? Are they earning a living wage in that economy? For those that want to take the next step in their educational careers, are they able to do that? And are they being successful in that? So I think, some standardized testing does play a role in our schools. I'm not unequivocally against standardized testing by any means. I do think rather than just continuing to pour on test after test after test, we should start looking at what outcomes-based measurements we can use to determine the success of a given school or given county educational district.
And what are those measurements looking like now?
Right. Well, so we're talking about it's hard to find a job right now. And especially if you're coming out of school, it's hard enough to keep a job if you've been having it. But if you're coming out of high school looking for a job, you're coming out of college looking for a job, it's very difficult to find. So I imagine those metrics would suffer a bit. But that's why it's so important to get our economy back on track as quickly as possible. And I'm glad to have some experience in doing that.
And one last question, Sam. Those minority-owned businesses, how many have been lost? How many are, should be needed in your district? And what's the future of minority-owned businesses?
Yeah, it's a huge percentage. So I'm glad you asked. First of all, recessions always affect the most vulnerable people and families. That's what people got to remember. It's easier to weather a recession if you have a lot of personal wealth built up. If you come from generational wealth, it's easier to survive a down year or downtime. If you are the first person in your family who's an entrepreneur, the first person who's building wealth, putting money in that savings account or starting a business, the major disruption can completely derail you. So more than half the jobs lost in the 2008 recession, more than half the businesses that closed in the 2008 recession, or it was minority-owned businesses, closed at twice the rate of non-minority-owned businesses. Right now in the Charleston area, 2 out of 5 Black families have had someone lose a job in their household. So, and then again, talking about service industry, hardworking people, but those are some of the industries that are hit the hardest. So, yeah, what my experiences teaches me is that it's not just the right thing to do to focus on minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses. I say that too because women-owned businesses often face similar challenges of not coming from generational wealth or not having the credit history that a lot of more established male-owned businesses do. we got to understand that when we hit these difficult economic times, all the data shows, and unfortunately we had a recession not too long ago, back in 2008, 2009, that shows it's the most vulnerable people, the most vulnerable businesses. They're the ones that are falling off the margins. If you're having to close your family restaurant, close your family catering business, family daycare, that business never comes back, or it takes a generation for it to come back. And then that's a wealth building opportunity that is lost for that family for years to come. So really important that we do our best to make sure the people who are most vulnerable aren't the first ones and the most common ones impacted by the recession we're in right now.
And what's the biggest difference between 2008 and 2009 and 2020 when you think of these businesses?
Yeah, that's a great question, Quintin. I'll try to put on my my economic history hat here. I'd say in 2008, what we were dealing with was there was a ton of debt that came due. A lot of people defaulted on loans. There's subprime mortgages. All of a sudden, mortgage rates shot through the roof, and all of a sudden you owed more on your house than it was worth. So even if you sold it, you were still in debt. What's happening now is just there's a total lack of demand. I mean, the hotels aren't filling up. There's no one to buy hotel rooms right now. Not as many people are going out to dinner or spending money on an airplane ticket or buying a new car or things like that, which is a whole different problem. And unfortunately, I think it's a scarier economic problem. And it goes back to why this is linked to the virus, and we have to beat the virus so quickly. Is you can only do so much to incentivize demand, incentivize spending. You can't just keep giving people money and hope they spend it. We've tried that, and it's been moderately effective for the last few months. But until this virus is beaten and people start spending like normally again, these businesses are going to keep being in trouble. So that's why beating this virus and taking it seriously and having real leadership on it is so important, because our economy, I don't think, will be back until we do that. And that's why wearing a mask is important. Please do wear a mask everywhere you go. To you and everyone listening, is you're not just keeping people healthy and safe, you're helping rebuild our economy because you're helping beat this virus. And I really do think that's our path out of this recession.
Sam Skardon, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thanks, Quintin.
Thank you.